John and Robert attacked Elizabeth when Mark was out with Elizabeth's sister Gail. They dragged her into the bathtub and made her say what they wanted into the tape recorder. They then tortured her and strangled her. When Mark and Gail got home, John said Elizabeth tried to hit on him, and she got upset when he rejected her and she stormed off to her room. Mark went to check on her, but she wasn't there, although her window was open, so John said she must have taken off. 4 days later, one of Elizabeth's friends called. She was concerned no one had heard from her and no one knew where she was. She heard Elizabeth Sinclair's voice saying, "Leave me alone, I'm all right." The phone then hung up. She rang back and heard Elizabeth say, "You're a slut. You're nothing but a dirty slut." The tape recordings had worked again. John was heard bad-mouthing Elizabeth Sinclair around town to anyone who would listen. Elizabeth had done a vanishing act, left Mark and pissed off with a new man. Nothing out of the ordinary for that dirty slut. Not all of Elizabeth's kids had been taken off her. She still had custody of some. People were shocked she would take off and leave her kids behind. They weren't even Mark Hayden's kids. John later had an update for all those concerned people. Elizabeth was working as a prostitute in King's Cross. Mark Hayden made sure he collected Elizabeth's welfare benefits. And although he might not have been there when it happened, when John showed him Elizabeth's body in the barrel, he started laughing. Elizabeth's brother filed a missing person report to police. The missing person report ended up on the desk of Detective Greg Stone. He was confused when he read that Elizabeth was married, but her husband never reported her missing. It was her brother that made the report. He gave Mark Hayden a call and requested that both he and Elizabeth's sister Gail attend the station for a chat. Mark wrote out a statement detailing how he was out with Gail, and when he got home, John told him Elizabeth had taken off after he rejected her advances. Mark said Robert Wagner was there too, and he could verify what happened. Gail gave exactly the same story. Robert Wagner rung a bell with Detective Stone, and when he checked it all out, he worked out that his name was also connected to the Barry Lane and Clinton Trezor's missing person reports. Something wasn't adding up. Detective Stone also arranged to speak to John Bunting, and John gave the exact same story as Mark and Gail. With the police starting to sniff around, John had only one thing on his mind: moving the barrels. There was now 5 barrels in Mark Hayden's garage, holding 7 victims. They moved the barrels at midnight. They used Mark Hayden's 4-wheel drive to put the barrels in, but they couldn't drive it as it was unregistered. They couldn't risk getting pulled over. So Robert towed the 4-wheel drive with his car and a trailer. But they could only fit 4 barrels in, so they stored the 5th barrel at Jamie's new place. They stored the 4-wheel drive at a property 2 hours outside of Adelaide. The property belonged to a friend of John Bunting. But it wasn't long before the wife of John's friend started to complain about the terrible smell coming from the barrels in the 4-wheel drive. John visited the property regularly to check on the barrels. He explained to them that they contained kangaroo carcasses that had been shot with an illegal gun, so that's why he had to hide them, so the cops wouldn't find out. By the end of 1998, police were of the belief that Elizabeth Sinclair had met with foul play. A search of her home revealed personal belongings, including her purse and bank cards, and lots of clothing. It didn't look like she had run off anywhere. When asked why all of her stuff was still at home, Mark Hayden just shrugged. He didn't know. But it is when Detective Stone conducted a search of Mark Hayden's garage that he knew. The smell was unmistakable. It couldn't be anything other than death. The bodies in the barrels were no longer there, but the smell was. They started door knocking on neighbours' houses. They learned that there was a few men loading stuff into Mark's 4-wheel drive recently, and Mark's 4-wheel drive was missing, They made it a priority to try and track down the vehicle. It was in early 1999 that John's friend, who was looking after the four-wheel drive, moved to Snowtown. Snowtown is a small country town with a population of only about 400 people. John helped them move, ensuring that the four-wheel drive went safely with them. It was during the move that John noticed a building for rent in Snowtown. It was an old bank that had closed down. It even still had a vault. John visited with the landlord and explained that the bank would be perfect for storing equipment that he used to rebuild cars and motorbikes. He handed over cash for rent and bond. The police investigation continued and they had 3 major suspects: John, Robert and Mark. They had listening devices and phone taps installed. They were all under surveillance. But the surveillance wasn't constant and the phone taps weren't listened to live. On the 9th of May 1999, Jamie Vlasakis told his old stepbrother David Johnson about a cheap computer for sale in Snowtown. David, the son of Marcus Johnson, Elizabeth Harvey's husband before she met John Bunting, eagerly jumped in the car. He was excited and thankful that Jamie helped him find a cheap computer. When they arrived at Snowtown, Jamie pointed David into the old bank. John and Robert were inside waiting. They jumped on him and handcuffed him. The tape recorder again came out, as did the request for his PIN number. Like the victims before him, he had to refer to his attackers as Master, Lord Sir, and God. During the torture, John instructed Robert and Jamie to try and withdraw money, to make sure David had given the correct PIN number. While they were gone, David was able to kick John in the ribs. John was furious and strangled him instantly, killing him much quicker than Robert usually would. Robert wasn't very happy when he returned and found out. John told Jamie and Robert to get on their play suits because this one was going to be a slice and dice. By play suits, he meant disposable overalls and gloves. Jamie looked at David's body and looked at the barrel they were going to put him into. He mentioned that David would fit inside without having to be cut up. But John and Robert weren't listening. They got to work, but they didn't put all of David in the barrel. When they were finished, they went to John's mate's place in Snowtown. Robert cooked up a piece of David's flesh in a fry pan. He said to Jamie, "Here, try some." Jamie didn't, but Robert and John both did. When people started to wonder where David was, John told them that he had taken off with another woman and wasn't coming back. David was engaged to a girl in Adelaide at the time. His fiancée turned up to David's house 4 days after his disappearance. John and Robert were actually there cleaning out his furniture. She broke down in tears when John told her he had taken off with another girl who he had gotten pregnant. She was convinced when she called David's phone, and the story was confirmed by the girl who answered. The girl was actually Gail Sinclair, but David's fiancée believed her. When police picked up the information about Snowtown on the intercepted phone calls and learnt through surveillance that John and Robert were headed back there again, they paid their own visit to the town. And they were in luck. They found the four-wheel driver Mark Hayden they had been looking for since Elizabeth Sinclair disappeared. It was the 20th of May 1999 when detectives along with a crime scene officer attended the property where they found the four-wheel drive. They spoke to John's friend, Dennis Caldwell. Caldwell was unfazed when detectives started asking questions. "Yeah, boys," he said. "It was brought here by me mate John and his mate Robert. It absolutely stunk, had some barrels in it. But they've since come back and taken the barrels. They now keep them up in the old bank. Here, I've got a key." Police made their way into the bank and into the vault. The smell was overwhelming. They started gagging.